In this video, we're going to look at arguments and functions a little more and see how you can have functions with variable numbers of arguments and how you can provide default values for arguments that you want to be optional. So first, I'm going to show you this function I've defined called speakSomething. And it takes 2 arguments. Your functions don't have to have 1 argument. They can have as many arguments as you want. So speakSomething takes 2 arguments. It takes what to say, hey, hey, and how many times to say it, 5 times. And so when I call this, it says, hey, hey, and also tells me how many times it's said it so far. So you could see that you can have more than 1 argument, but what if, say, you want to provide default values for this? So what if I know that I want to say, hey, hey, but I don't care how many times it's said, and I let the function do that for me? Well, I can do that. I can even provide no arguments. And it provides a default remark and says it a default number of times. So how do we do this with JavaScript? Here is my speakSomething function. I have the argument what and the argument how many. Now in some programming languages, there are ways to specify default values right here where you specify the parameters. JavaScript does not provide that, so you need to do it another way. Here's one way you can do this. So here I'm using the ternary operator, and the condition that I'm checking against is what the type of what is. And I'm basically asking, is what not undefined? And so if what is not undefined, I keep the value of what in the what variable. And if it is undefined, I provide my default value here. Same thing with how many. We check that it's not undefined, and if so, we use the how many value. Otherwise, we use 10. Now when you do your default arguments this way, the order of them matters. So I can't just say speakSomething and then 10. Or I can, but it's going to say 10 times, because 10 will be used as the first argument. So you can provide these default values, but the order still matters. Now let's switch back to the console. And if you were paying attention there, you saw I have another function called addingMachine. And this takes any number of arguments at all. It doesn't care. So I can add 1, 2, and 3 and get 6, or I can go totally crazy and put as many numbers as I want in here, and it will add them up. So how does this work? Let's switch back and check it out. So here's the function addingMachine, and it's making use of a property that every function knows about. It knows about its arguments. It's taking advantage of a property that every function has, the arguments array. So technically speaking, this is defined as part of the global function object. Every function is an object. We'll get into that later. But suffice it to say that inside a function, you have access to this arguments array. And like all arrays, it has a length property. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a for loop to iterate over that arguments array and then pick up the number that is each individual argument, and then I'm adding it to a running total. And of course, checking to make sure that the argument in question is actually a number using the type of operator. So to run this down, we initialize a total of 0, then we loop over the arguments array, grab the number, check its type, and if it's a number, add it to the total. And once that's all done, return it. So that's how this function works. And you can use the arguments array not just for loops to run through everything that's passed in, but you could also pull out arguments based on their index directly. So for example, in this speakSomething function, I have these 2 arguments, what and how many. And I can still specify them by name up here, but if I wanted to, I could address them in my function as arguments sub 0 and arguments sub 1. So you can use the arguments array any way you like. But now you know that functions can take an arbitrary number of arguments. You can name them, or you can use the arguments array to address them. And you can use a for loop to iterate over the entire arguments array, allowing completely arbitrary numbers of arguments.